In just 24 seconds, one of British television's most beloved chat shows descended into absolute chaos, as comedy legend Ricky Gervais found himself locked in a brutal verbal battle with host Graham Norton that would end with the most dramatic walkout in the show's history. What started as lighthearted banter about Gervais's latest Netflix special quickly spiraled into a vicious personal attack that left the studio audience in stunned silence and cameras rolling on what can only be described as career suicide for one of these men. The tension was palpable from the moment Gervais settled into the famous red chair. Norton, typically charming and effortlessly witty, seemed different tonight. There was an edge to his smile, a sharpness in his eyes that seasoned viewers of the show had never seen before. The other guests, including acclaimed actress Saoirse Ronan and musician Sam Smith, exchanged uncomfortable glances as Norton launched into what initially appeared to be his standard opening pleasantries. "Ricky, you're back with us again." And as always, stirring up controversy, Norton began his Irish accent, carrying an undertone that made Gervais visibly shift in his seat. "Your new special has been making waves, though not always for the reasons you might hope." Gervais, never one to back down from confrontation, leaned forward with that trademark smirk. "Well, Graham, controversy is just another word for honesty when you're dealing with people who can't handle the truth. But I'm sure you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The audience laughed, but it was nervous laughter, the kind that fills a room when people sense something darker brewing beneath the surface. Norton's smile never wavered, but those who knew him well could see the muscles in his jaw tighten imperceptibly. "Oh, I think I know plenty about truth, Ricky," Norton replied, his voice taking on a silky quality that somehow managed to sound more threatening than if he'd been shouting. "The question is whether you do. Because, from where I'm sitting, it seems like your version of truth has become increasingly, shall we say, problematic." The word hung in the air like a challenge thrown down at dawn. Gervais's expression shifted from amused confidence to something harder, more defensive. "Problematic? That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of playing it safe, kissing ass, and never saying anything that might actually matter." A collective intake of breath rippled through the studio audience. This wasn't the playful back and forth that Norton's viewers had come to expect. This was personal, and everyone could feel it. Norton's laugh was sharp and cold. "Playing it safe? Is that what you call it when I don't feel the need to punch down at every minority group I can think of just to get a cheap laugh from people who peaked in secondary school?" The other guests on the sofa suddenly found their drinks fascinating, studying the contents of their glasses as if they contained the secrets of the universe. Saoirse Ronan's publicist, visible in the wings, was frantically gesturing to someone off camera, clearly trying to signal that this was going too far. Gervais's face flushed red, but his voice remained dangerously calm. "Punch down? Is that what we're calling comedy now? I've never punched down in my life, Graham. I punch up. I punch sideways. I punch wherever I see hypocrisy and pretension. And right now, I'm looking at a whole lot of both." "Are you now?" Norton's tone was practically dripping with disdain. "Because, from where I'm sitting, watching you spend the last 5 years desperately trying to stay relevant by saying increasingly outrageous things, it looks less like punching up and more like the flailing of someone who knows their time is up." The studio fell silent, except for the quiet hum of cameras and the barely audible breathing of an audience that couldn't quite believe what they were witnessing. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a public execution, and nobody was sure who was holding the axe. Gervais leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing to slits. "My time is up? That's interesting. Coming from someone who's essentially become the court jester for the very establishment he used to mock. Tell me, Graham, when exactly did you decide to sell your soul? Was it gradual, or did you wake up one morning and think, you know what? I fancy being a toothless lapdog for the rest of my career?" The insult hit its mark. For just a fraction of a second, Norton's carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing something raw and angry underneath. But he recovered quickly, his smile returning with renewed venom. "At least I evolved, Ricky. At least I learned that true comedy doesn't require making transgender people the punchline of every other joke, or pretending that your inability to adapt to a changing world is somehow brave or revolutionary." And there it was, the accusation that would change everything. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Gervais's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The playful combativeness vanished, replaced by something much darker and more dangerous. "What did you just say to me?" Gervais's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than if he'd been screaming. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as two of Britain's biggest entertainment figures stared each other down like gunfighters in an old western. Norton, perhaps sensing he'd crossed a line but unable to back down now, pressed forward with the reckless abandon of a man who'd already committed to his path. "You heard me perfectly well, Ricky, and I think it's about time someone said it on live television, don't you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the studio crew seemed to have stopped breathing as they watched Gervais process what had just been thrown at him. His hands, which had been gesturing animatedly throughout the conversation, slowly clenched into fists on his knees. When he spoke, his voice was ice-cold and razor-sharp. "You sanctimonious piece of shit," Gervais said, each word deliberate and cutting. "You sit there in your designer suit, on your little throne, pretending to be some moral authority while you've spent your entire career being a fucking sycophant to anyone with money or power." The audience gasped collectively. This was unprecedented territory for the normally family-friendly show. Sam Smith looked like they wanted to disappear into the sofa cushions, while Saoirse Ronan had gone completely pale. Norton's smile faltered for the first time since the exchange began, but his voice remained steady. "There it is. The real Ricky Gervais, ladies and gentlemen. When faced with legitimate criticism, resort to profanity and personal attacks. How very evolved of you." "Legitimate criticism?" Gervais laughed. But there was no humor in it, only contempt. "You wouldn't know legitimate criticism if it bit you on your surgically enhanced ass. What you just did wasn't criticism, Graham. It was character assassination, and you know it." The host leaned forward, his own facade finally beginning to crack. "Character assassination? I'm simply pointing out what everyone in this industry has been whispering about for years. You've become a caricature of yourself, Ricky. A bitter, aging comedian who mistakes cruelty for honesty and thinks his declining relevance gives him the right to say whatever he wants without consequences." "Consequences?" Gervais's voice rose dangerously. "What consequences exactly? Are you threatening me, Graham? Because if you are, I'd love to hear what the BBC's golden boy thinks he can do to someone who actually has the balls to speak truth to power." The mention of the BBC seemed to hit Norton like a physical blow. His carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely, revealing the raw nerve underneath. "Don't you dare talk to me about truth to power. You've never spoken truth to power in your life. You speak lies to the powerless and call it comedy." "Lies to the powerless?" Gervais was on his feet now, towering over the seated host. "You want to know what lies to the powerless looks like? It looks like you, Graham. It looks like pretending to care about social justice while taking money from corporations that exploit workers. It looks like virtue signaling on your little chat show while living in your ivory tower, completely disconnected from the real world." Norton stood as well, bringing them face to face in the center of the studio. "At least I don't use my platform to spread hate and call it brave. At least I don't hide behind the label of comedian to justify saying things that hurt real people." "Hurt real people?" Gervais's voice was approaching a roar now. "You mean like calling someone a bigot on live television without a shred of evidence? You mean like trying to destroy someone's reputation because they won't bend the knee to your particular brand of performative wokeness?" The two men were standing inches apart now, their voices echoing through the studio as years of professional rivalry and ideological differences exploded into open warfare. The other guests had shrunk back into their seats, while crew members stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or keep filming this unprecedented meltdown. Norton's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "The only thing I'm destroying here tonight is the illusion that you're anything more than a washed-up has been desperately clinging to relevance by attacking marginalized communities." And with those words, something inside Gervais finally snapped completely. The point of no return had been reached, and what came next would shock everyone in that studio to their core. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Gervais stood completely still, his face cycling through emotions so quickly it was impossible to read them all. Then, without warning, he threw back his head and laughed. Not the warm, infectious laugh his fans knew, but something cold and bitter that sent chills down the spines of everyone present. Washed up has-been? Gervais repeated, his voice now eerily calm. Attacking marginalized communities? Graham, you've just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic career, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Norton, perhaps finally realizing he'd pushed things too far, tried to backpedal. Ricky, look, maybe we should. No, no, no. Gervais cut him off, wagging his finger like a teacher scolding a child. You don't get to walk this back now. You wanted to do this on live television? Fine. Let's do it properly. He turned to address the cameras directly, ignoring Norton entirely. Ladies and gentlemen watching at home, you've just witnessed something extraordinary. You've seen what happens when someone who's spent years playing the nice guy finally shows their true colors. The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Norton stood frozen, his face pale as he realized the full implications of what was happening. Gervais continued, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. This man just accused me of being a bigot, of attacking marginalized people, without providing a single shred of evidence. He did it because he knows it's the kind of accusation that's designed to destroy careers in our current climate. It's the ultimate weapon for someone who's intellectually bankrupt and morally corrupt. That's not what Norton tried to interject, but Gervais steamrolled over him. But here's what's really rich about all this, Graham. You want to talk about attacking people? Let's talk about how you've spent the last 10 minutes systematically trying to destroy my reputation and livelihood on live television. Let's talk about how you ambushed me with prepared attacks while pretending this was just casual conversation. Let's talk about who the real bully is in this scenario. The camera operators, unsure whether they should still be filming, continued to roll as this unprecedented situation unfolded. Norton's hands were visibly shaking now, and beads of sweat had formed on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. You know what the difference between us is, Graham? Gervais asked, stepping even closer to the trembling host. When I make jokes that offend people, I own it. I stand by what I've said, and I'm willing to face the consequences. But you hide behind this veneer of respectability while engaging in character assassination, and then you act shocked when someone calls you out on it. Sam Smith had quietly slipped off the sofa and was trying to make their way toward the exit, clearly wanting no part of what was happening. Saoirse Ronan remained frozen in place, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination at witnessing television history in the making. Norton finally found his voice again, but it came out as barely more than a croak. Ricky, please, can we just what? Pretend this didn't happen? Move on like you didn't just try to end my career on live television? Gervais shook his head in disgust. You know what your problem is, Graham? You've been protected by the establishment for so long that you forgot what it's like to face real consequences for your actions. Well, congratulations, you're about to learn. The comedian began walking toward the studio exit, then paused and turned back one final time. You want to know what attacking marginalized communities actually looks like? It looks like what you just did to me. It looks like using your platform and your power to try and destroy someone who disagrees with you politically. It looks like weaponizing social justice language to silence opposition. That's what real bigotry looks like. And everyone watching tonight just saw it in action. Norton, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, made one last attempt. Ricky, wait. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. If we could just sit down and... But Gervais was having none of it. A misunderstanding? The only misunderstanding here was me thinking you had any integrity left. You've shown your true face tonight, Graham, and it's fucking ugly. You're a coward, a hypocrite, and a bully who hides behind progressive rhetoric while engaging in the exact behavior you claim to oppose. The host's composure finally cracked completely. Years of pent-up resentment and professional jealousy came pouring out as he shouted after the departing comedian. You can't just walk away from this, Ricky. You can't run every time someone challenges your bullshit. Gervais stopped dead in his tracks and slowly turned around, his expression now one of genuine pity. Challenge my bullshit? Is that what you call this pathetic display? Graham, you didn't challenge anything tonight. You exposed yourself as exactly the kind of person you pretend to stand against. You've done more damage to your own reputation in the last 15 minutes than I ever could have." The audience began to murmur among themselves, some clearly Team Gervais, others seemingly shocked by the entire spectacle. The other guests looked like they wanted to disappear entirely, caught in the crossfire of what had become an all-out war between two titans of British entertainment. "You know what the saddest part of all this is?" Gervais asked, his voice now filled with genuine disappointment rather than anger. "I actually used to respect you, Graham. I thought you were one of the good ones, someone who understood that comedy should push boundaries and challenge people to think. But tonight, you've shown that you're just another establishment puppet, willing to destroy anyone who doesn't toe the party line." Norton, his face now flushed red with a mixture of embarrassment and rage, made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "Get out then. If you can't handle a real conversation about your material, then just fucking leave." The profanity from the usually polished host sent shockwaves through the studio. This was Norton completely unhinged, stripped of all pretense and dignity, but Gervais just smiled. Not with malice, but with the satisfaction of someone who had just proven their point beyond any doubt. "There it is," he said quietly, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "The real Graham Norton, ladies and gentlemen. Mask off at last. Thank you for proving every point I've ever made about the rot in this industry." With that, Ricky Gervais walked calmly toward the exit, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos. Norton stood in the center of the stage, breathing heavily, his career potentially in ruins after showing his true colors on live television. The other guests remained motionless, unsure whether to stay or flee. The audience sat in stunned silence, having witnessed the most spectacular implosion in chat show history. As Gervais reached the exit, he paused one final time without turning around. "Oh, and Graham? Next time you want to destroy someone's career, maybe don't do it on live television. It tends to backfire spectacularly." The studio doors closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gunshot in the deathly quiet that followed. Graham Norton's show had just witnessed its most dramatic moment ever, and quite possibly its last, as the host stood alone in the wreckage of what had once been his sterling reputation, finally exposed as the very thing he'd spent his career pretending to oppose.